Welcome, everyone, to Wednesday evening with the Clear Mountain Monastery community. Today, we are very happy to have our Ajahn mentor, brother, friend, Ajahn Jotipālo joining us. So, Ajahn, thank you very much for joining us. Ajahn, I'm going to read a short biography about you, the latter part of which I'm going to a little bit freestyle because it's insufficient. But Ajahn Jotipālo was born in 1965 in Indiana and became interested in theravada Buddhism after sitting several Goenka retreats as a young adult. While on staff at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, he met Ajahn Punadhammo, with whom he lived for 3 months at Arrow River Forest Hermitage in Canada, and Ajahn Amaro, founding abbot of a Abhayagiri monastery, where he went to live in 1998 and where he took bhikkhu ordination with Ajahn Pasano as his preceptor in 2000. Since that time, Ajahn Jotipālo has stayed at Ajahn Chah branch monasteries in Thailand, New Zealand, and is currently living at Birken Forest Monastery in BC. So that was the basic bio that I had. But I met you, I think, when I first went to Abhayagiri, or long thereafter in 2007 or 2008, something like that. And since that time, we've been good friends, and currently has a very nice YouTube channel called Sauntering Into Silence. So that's the extended rambling sauntering biography. But Ajahn, so metta, the practice of loving kindness meditation, has been a theme throughout your monastic life, probably throughout many monastic lives. But could you tell us your journey with loving kindness and how it's developed and changed through the years?
Yeah. Well, I'd say you mentioned I started with the Goenka method. And the Goenka usually at the end of every meditation or at the end of every day would do probably the chanting of the Metta Sutta, or just do a chant of metta for the group. And I just kind of always thought that was kind of the extent of what the practice was, not really having any background at all in Buddhism or that kind of culture. But I guess it was probably a couple of years later, kind of just using the Goenka method, but then getting involved in some other types of meditations. I don't really, it's been so long now, I can't really remember the sequence or the history of it. But I guess I was in Thailand, and I sat a retreat with the Australian couple. I forget their names now, but they did a loving kindness meditation. And it just really moved me. It was very different from the way, I guess I had been exposed to it a little bit at IMS. I sat a retreat at IMS, which is kind of based on using the kind of the formula of repeating phrases and sending them to various categories of people. So when I was in Thailand, I did this retreat with this lay couple. That was the first time it just really clicked with me. And I just remember, it was the first meditation that I discovered that I wanted to do it. I was like really looking forward to developing the practice. And so I think I went back to IMS, and then I actually joined the staff and was there for a year. And then I got to know the method that is basically from the Visuddhimagga, is where they're teaching the Burmese style. And I really kind of threw myself into that. And then that was I think for probably 3 or 4 years, that was like the main meditation practice that I did.
So, Ajahn, or actually, were you going to continue? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I could.
Carry on.
That
was part of it. Yeah, give us a little more towards where you are now.
Yeah, so I think it was I was talking to Ajahn Pasano about, well, actually, there's a fun story with this. I was living with Ajahn Sujato and Ajahn Shaganando at the Pacific Hermitage. And Ajahn Sujato told the story at his group, so I don't think I'm incriminating anybody by telling the story, but he had gone to Thailand to see his teacher, Ajahn Gunha. And he had just started being the abbot there at the Pacific Hermitage. And he asked Ajahn Gunha, what he should do as his practice. And Ajahn Gunha told him he should develop loving kindness. And Ajahn Sujato said to his group, he said this when he came back, and it was just getting back. He said, I don't know how to do that. And he said that in front of his group. And I was really perplexed. I was kind of like, what does he mean? He gives wonderful talks on the subject. What does he mean he doesn't know how doesn't know how to do that. And then the next day on the alms round, I was just contemplating that all day. And I started thinking about it. I said, like, well, actually, before I became a monastic, that was my main practice, was loving kindness, and very serious practice with that. But as soon as I ordained, it kind of dried up, and I wasn't able to do it. And it just felt really dry. And at the time, I just sort of assumed it was like, there's so much to learn as a monastic. There's how to get dressed, for one thing, but all the rules we have to learn, all the chanting we have to learn, just the etiquette of the monastery. And so it was, I just figured that was, majority of it was just learning how to be in community, was just taking up my time, and just for some odd reason, the metta wasn't connecting. And so when I thought about what Ajahn Jotipālo had said, I was like, well, what do I know about metta? Like here, I haven't been able to do it for 3 or 4 years. So it's like, do I know how to do it? And so it was wonderful. We were just entering into a winter retreat. And so the three of us sat down and we tried to remember like every single teaching we could remember, every book we'd ever read, every article, every Dhamma talk we'd heard on metta. And we gathered all that material. And every night for the 3-month winter retreat, we would pull one of them out and one of us would read it, or we'd listen to a talk, and we'd have a discussion about it. And the one thing that really impressed me was we were just looking at the Buddha's words on loving kindness, the Metta Sutta, and I think as Ajahn Jotipālo pointed out, there's only one place in the entire sutta where the Buddha actually describes what metta is. Only one line. He says it's having non-ill will. That's the only, if you read the whole thing, you guys would probably really appreciate it if you really look at that sutta, because like the verb case keeps changing throughout the sutta. It's like it's what should be done, what is done, what will happen. So it's this really beautiful sutta. But yeah, the only place is where he mentions what metta is an intention, the intention of non-ill will. And I was like, I remember this like light bulb went off in my head, and like, I can do that. And my joke is, no, I can't. But I was like, okay, that's something that's doable. And so it really started making me question like everything of how I had been practicing, and what was the intention, or even what the results were. So when I came back to Abhayagiri after being up at the Hermitage, I was talking to Ajahn Jotipālo about this, kind of interviewing with him. And he suggested, he says, oh, I've got these notes that it was, at the time was a novice, but it's Ajahn Sujato in Australia, had been in correspondence with a French monk who was living in Bangkok with Mahā ChatChai, Ajahn Mahā ChatChai, who was known for, he wasn't actually very known at all, but he did have this practice of developing loving kindness into a state of jhana and metta bhavana. And so Sujāto, Ajahn Sujato, was writing back and forth to this French monk, and Ajahn Jotipālo, he was the abbot of the monastery that Sujāto was living at that time. And so he had copies of the notes as well, or was kind of listening in, or following along with their dialogue. But the notes were, I describe it as a mystery novel, because they weren't dated sequentially. Sometimes you got the list of questions, but you didn't have any answers, or sometimes you got obvious answers that you didn't know what the questions were. Or it was just like all over the map. But I was able to piece together pretty much, I think what needed to be done. And then for a winter retreat with Ajahn Jotipālo's guidance, even though he had never, I don't think, really practiced with that method, he's not really into, my understanding is that Jotipālo is not really into a method for doing loving kindness, because that's how I started with doing the phrases and the categories, and that's how Ajahn Mahā ChatChai did it, but just a much different emphasis. And so I took that on for a 3-month winter retreat, and it just had, I thought, just really great results. And so it's fascinating that I was just getting ready to lead a retreat on the Brahmavihāras down in Texas, here in actually just about a week, but that got canceled for various reasons. But I've been doing a lot more research and kind of reviving the practice again for myself. And I just decided to look online to see if there was anything about Ajahn ChatChai, and I found that Ajahn Sujato, I think it was about 10 years ago. You guys looked at the link I showed you. Was that 10 years ago he did it?
I thought it was more recently, but
Oh,
not in the too long past. Yeah.
yeah, not too long. Yeah, but Ajahn Sujato was talking to a community for their winter retreat once a week. He was giving some talks about each of the subjects, and it's quite fascinating. That I'm so far just I think I'm day 8 into the 10 days of this of his notes, and I'm picking up a lot of stuff that like missed in the notes, or kind of read between the lines. And there's a certain things too that I picked up in the notes that he hasn't mentioned in the talks, which I found kind of interesting. So it's yeah, I'm kind of, how would you say it, like almost on fire right now for this loving kindness practice, because it's like with this new input, it's like I'm seeing things, emphasis slightly different on things that, oh, that makes sense.
So when we asked Ajahn Jotipālo what the topic of this interview should be, he recommended metta, which we were glad about, because I think you're right, Ajahn. It's quite often that people will rejoice in metta practice initially, but it'll dry up. And the Metta Sutta, which you're recommending, you're right. Most of it is the 15 qualities you have to develop before metta practice. And then the actual instructions are fairly simple. And the Visuddhimagga practice, which most people know about, spreading loving kindness to yourself, to someone close to you, to a neutral person, to an enemy, or someone who's disagreeable. I mean, that's commonly referenced and sort of the go-to. But would you give us the real, for the listeners here, can you give us the 5-minute kind of structure of Mahā ChatChai's, like, such that someone could go away from this interview being able to actually try out this method? And we will post that series of talks in the description for people to reference. But right now, can you give us the basics of what's revitalized the practice for you?
I'm
No pressure.
I'm smirking when you say that, because it's like, Ajahn Nisabho, how long have you known me? Can I say anything in 5 minutes?
10 minutes. 10 minutes to teach us all metta practice that will enliven our meditation for the next few lifetimes.
So I think, I was thinking about this. The couple of the things that really fascinated me by listening to Ajahn Sujato talk about this is he really emphasized, which I didn't pick up at all the first time, is that the way Ajahn Mahā ChatChai talks about doing this practice is there's different levels. So you start with yourself, then you go to the neutral, or the easy person, like a teacher or a friend, then the neutral, and then the difficult person. But he's like, that first stage of just being able to do yourself, like, I mean, take a year to develop that. It's like there's no reason to rush, or you really do need to be able to feel this. You need to be able to immerse yourself completely into the feeling of this loving kindness, because it's a concentration practice. So you're developing it for yourself. But the thing that I missed was he actually starts off with what he called Chit Pen Klang, which is the way Ajahn Sujato said. One way, the direct translation is the mind in the middle, but it's equanimity practice. And so there's a lot of emphasis in his talk initially, just for this group, of just really developing equanimity, and even mentions so if you have the Goenka practice, if you know how to do the body scanning, or just body awareness, or people that are really attracted to anapanasati, that can get some joy from watching the breath, that's basically the same thing. So it's really developing your mind. So it's in this. He kept using words too. I really appreciated, like say a gentle mind, a mind that's not striving, one that's he never used this word, but like the way I see it is being content. And so it's like you're actually at the very beginning. You're not trying to develop this feeling of love or kindness even. It's just this steady, happy, joyful mind. And then once that gets developed, then you start doing yourself. And you start developing yourself. And then what he kind of says, what Ajahn Mahā ChatChai says, is you need to develop where you can stay consistent in the sort of feeling of goodwill at a very, he even used the word like superficial level. It's like you don't want to go deep into it. And it's at a superficial level, because he says, you need the equanimity, because actually, metta, goodwill, can have these feelings of great joy and great rapture, and just feelings of almost, you can get into bliss and rapture doing this kind of practice. And that was my problem before when I was a layperson, when I did it. I do have a talk online, you probably look on YouTube, called "Why I Hate Loving Kindness Meditation," and I think I maybe even gave that at your place too. But I talk about that, how I used to use loving kindness meditation as a way of not feeling. Like if there was a way of, like if I was, had a difficulty or something was an issue for me, I could obliterate it by just going into loving kindness. So it was a way of not dealing with reality. So what Ajahn ChatChai is pointing out is that you need the equanimity to be really strong, because then when those feelings of rapture and joy come up, we don't get sucked into it. We actually just want to observe it. We just want to see it. We don't actually want to get blissed out. It may happen, but it's better if you can just stay in the equanimity. And then the other thing, this is what really shocked me, was he said, when you start using the phrases, and he said, just really don't worry about the meaning of the words. He said, try to actually just to find words that feel good to you, that actually sound good to you. It's not even the meaning, it's just that it actually feels good to say them. So
do you have a few that you use, Ajahn, that you could share?
I learned from IMS 4 phrases. May I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease of well-being. So I've always stuck with those, because I've kind of developed this emotional response to each one of those different phrases. And so that they work for me, but anything that works. But what Ajahn Sujato is pointing out is that he says, you don't worry about, like, you don't need to keep analyzing, like, are these the right phrases? Is this, am I doing this wrong? Just come up with the phrase. And then, I've kind of lost my train of thought, but you're just using these, and you're not actually, it's like you're not even trying to develop the emotion. What he said was, is what you need to do at the very beginning is, when you say those phrases, may I be safe, or whatever it is for you, may I be happy. He says you need to say it with as much pristine clarity as you can, because it's like the more emphasis you put into and the more exact you are, then that carries on through everything else in the meditation throughout the whole year that you're doing this. So it's like the results that you want to get at the end, you want to be subtle, you want to be steady, you want to be solid. So start off with even how you say the phrases that way.
Ajahn, when Bhante Sujato was giving that giving that exact step, talking about being very clear, precise, and steady about the way you say the words, he said that Ajahn ChatChai would then use an English phrase, make them clear and steady like Shakespeare. Does that mean anything to you? I couldn't quite figure out what he was suggesting to do by that. But
I missed that, because it probably didn't make any sense to me. So,
yeah.
But I can say, I mean, like a Shakespearean actor, they're
clear on a stage. Okay.
I could
Or in an English accent.
Oh yeah,
could be.
But that would be my guess. Like, if someone's an actor, professional, they're not slurring their words, they're being precise. So that was one thing that really impressed me, was listening to these notes, or listening to Ajahn Sujato's notes about this. The other one that kind of shocked me he said, when you start moving on to the other categories of people, he said, like, you take a good friend. So if I was, say, going to take on Ajahn Kovilo, I'm sorry, Nisabho, I'm going to take on Kovilo today. But if I took on Ajahn Kovilo, he said, actually don't think about Ajahn Kovilo. Like, don't try to develop a mental image of him or the stories behind him or anything. He says you try to find someone who he's pretty clear on like how to figure out which person you should use. And it's basically someone like that you're not have a complex. Like he said, you don't want a deep love. because the deep love is actually complex. And we're looking for simple. You're looking for somebody it's easy to do loving kindness for. And there's a whole bunch, list of like, don't do someone that you might be sexually attracted to. Don't do it for someone who's passed away. It should be a human being, not an animal. There's all these various reasons for these things. But he said, when you think of the person you want to do, so think of it before the meditation starts, and then use that person for just that particular meditation. You can switch around later, but just for the meditation, that one meditation, just stay with the same person throughout the whole time. And then he said, but all you do is you say the name, because the name of the person will bring up enough for you to have something to send the loving kindness to. And that was kind of revolutionary, because I used to spend time thinking about the person and trying to remember a funny story or something that would make me enduring to they would feel enduring. And so that was quite interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating series to hear Bhante Sujato talk about it. He talks about tricks of the trade to kind of induce metta. And one of them I'd never heard of or thought about before is actually, if you're doing metta and you can't really get the juices up, just pretend like you're doing metta. Just to pretend like you're doing metta, which I thought was a good, skillful means.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm curious if you have any other takeaways from that. One of your recent videos, actually, you talk about how you incorporate metta both into your formal walking meditation, I think your most recent video, and into your sauntering, and that they're different practices. Maybe you could say a bit more about that.
I try to produce a video every Thursday morning. And so actually my video for tomorrow morning is going to also be on walking meditation. And but last week's video, I talked about how what I'll do is I'll take a walking path. So like if it's from there from here to there, I'll divide the walking meditation into quarters. And so like at the halfway point, I'll put a rock or a stick or something, and then at the quarters. And then I use the phrases, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. And how I developed the practice over time was you are actually, with the metta, you're trying to replace our emotional life that we have before that's maybe unwholesome or unskillful or just kind of maybe even just in delusion, we're not really sure what we're doing, with a mental quality of how we want to be in the world. So you're by just even saying the phrases, you're replacing, I think it was used in the Sujāto used the phrase, you get rid of the crap. Get rid of that junk that's in our mind, and let's replace it with something wholesome. So just even saying the phrase, may I be happy, you're introducing a new potential way of being in the world. And so the way I developed the practice with the phrases is when I say the word happy, I've done this long enough now, when I say the word happy, I actually know physically how that affects me in the body when I am happy. So I can actually just say the phrase and a certain quality of that can arise. And so if there's situations where I don't feel safe, I can just say the word safe and allow that feeling to arise. You're actually manipulating your emotions in a skillful way. And one of the funny stories is I think you two may have been there when Bhante Bhikkhu Bodhi was visiting at Vayagiri, and I kind of explained this to him. And I told him, I said, I learned to use the phrases, may I be healthy. I said, but it doesn't, there's no emotional response to that. And if you know Bhikkhu Bodhi, he has chronic headaches and his health isn't that great. And so when I said this, he looked at me and goes, you are so deluded. I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm asking Bhikkhu Bodhi about, not understanding good health. And so it's just like, so now whenever I use that phrase, it just brings a great chuckle to my heart. Like, wow, like I live in a countries with greatest healthcare in the world. I've never gone a day without food. Even as a monastic, living on faith, I still never had a day where food wasn't offered. Just, it's just the requisites were always offered, and it's just, it's like, wow, I am so blessed.
Ajahn,
that's health.
No, I think that's there have been certain meditation objects. I find the word is enough. Like with the Suba, just bones, without even imagining, will often invoke something in the chitta. With it's interesting that you pointed to in the Metta Sutta, the Buddha's one instruction towards loving kindness is saying non-ill will, and of the three samasankappo, right intentions, two of the three deal with non-ill will and non-cruelty.
Yeah.
And I find for many people, including myself, however much I want to dive into the friendly, loving, glittery waters of metta, honestly, just not dwelling in the marsh of aversion is really the biggest project in my life. With regards to this particular spectrum, how, you've lived at monasteries where I'm sure you've lived with people who you have aversion towards. How, before even the metta practice gets going, how do you just put down aversion, those old grudges that we keep chewing on again and again? Like, give us some practical means for that, because that's, I think, a huge task for people.
Yeah. And I think that comes into, again, like how Ajahn Mahā ChatChai sets this practice up, is equanimity, is really developing that practice of equanimity. And so, and classically, if you're doing the Brahmavihāra practices and doing the equanimity, the phrases are, it's really, it's one that I actually never sit down and meditate to do, like this, of the Brahmavihāra, of all the different, Brahmavihāras as a practice, like metta practice, everybody, kind of knows how to do this. But equanimity, it's really just using phrases, very simple phrases like, it's like this, that's the way it is. It's like, especially if it's like annoyance with a person or something like that, it's like, just a good, phrase to have in the back of our mind is something like, it's like they're suffering. Like if they're doing something intentionally to try to provoke you, it's like they're suffering. And it's like, and there's, it's like I can wish them well, but they're the owner of their karma. Those are the phrases for equanimity. And they seem cold, but they're really not. It's this. Actually, Ajahn Sona, he made this really interesting comment about using with the Brahmavihāras, is that he says equanimity is needed in the practice because it balances loving kindness and mudita, the joy at other people's good fortune. That keeps us from sort of going into bliss or just the extremes of the emotions with that. But metta and karuna balance equanimity. They keep equanimity from falling into sort of despair or indifference. So that's the one thing. It's like the talk that I give on why I hate loving kindness meditation is that's a joke of a title, but it is. I think people study it wrong, or they teach it wrong. Because I think like actually all four of the Brahmavihāras are needed. So the way I describe it is like if you take on a practice of loving kindness without the other three, what you're doing is you're opening the heart. And what are we opening the heart to? Well, the world. And the world contains a lot of joy and a lot of suffering. And so if you don't have the equanimity, it just blows you away. So what I noticed in my own practice was I would be practicing and I'd be getting high, and then I'd crash, and then I'd have to restart the practice, and again I'd get really, really high, and then something sad would happen, you crash again. And so it was just this constant build up, crash, and and that's why I couldn't do it anymore, because it wore me out. And so then when I had the sort of insight that no, it's like all four of these practices are needed. So then that's where it's like when there's great suffering in the world, compassion comes in. And it's like these wings. So then when there's great joy, you start getting, so it balances. So I always feel like loving kindness is this beacon that's coming out into the world and looking for, wants to, have kindness towards everything. But then suffering arises, and then starts doing this. And then the anchor point in the heart, that's equanimity. And so it's like all four of them are needed. They all have their own purposes. And so that's why I look at equanimity. I think it's really the key. And that's only something that recently I've been kind of coming to understand. The other thing too, one of the things in the notes that I was looking at is with this equanimity is that it's one way of looking at it is it's sort of like space in your mind or in the meditation. You might remember this, Kovilo, if you've watched these recently. But he said that it's the emptiness in the space that we can develop through equanimity in our meditation that actually gives structure to our minds. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. Yeah, I was impressed when Ajahn Sujato is talking about the Jai Bing Klang, the heart that's in the middle practice, and he compares it to Zazen just sitting, or to Dzogchen just knowing, or even to Lumpur Sumedho's, as you did, just it's like this practice. So
Yeah.
all these different ways to come to the middle, maybe different language that works for different people.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about just bringing up Lumpur Sumedho. I was listening to a talk of his, and I remember, I talked to both of you about this too, but it was, he made the comment about equanimity. He was saying, says, when I look at equanimity, because that's an ideal. That's, the way Lumpur Sumedho talks, which I love. But he said, it's like, that's an ideal. Like, I want to be equanimous but when I look at my personality, I don't think there's anything that I can do as a person to be equanimous. And again, I would say, it was the first time I kind of really understood at a deep level what Lumpur Sumedho has been talking about all these years that I've been listening to him.
Ajahn, we're going to go to questions in a moment. I just wanted to highlight one of your recent teachings that you've talked about is this metaphor of carrots and eggs and coffee beans. I don't know. I'm curious if you could relate that to the practice of loving kindness, or
you'll have to refresh my mind, but I do remember that. But what was that again?
So I think it's about how different people take on different teachings. So some people they start off like a carrot. They're hard outside, hard inside.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's like, I remember that. So what was it? So you take an egg, a carrot, and a coffee bean, and you put them into boiling water. And so the carrot is going to, turn soft and mushy, and then you can eat it. And it's going to be soft on the outside and soft on the inside. The egg, you put it in the boiling water, it's still going to be hard on the outside. So it's like, it didn't change its personality that way, but you can still eat it. It's nourishing. Whereas the coffee bean, you put that in there and it just turns into something delicious. Transform. And that was the other thing too. It's like, the coffee bean is like, we were laughing about. It was like, that's metta practice, because it not like the other two. It's like the water transforms the carrot and the egg, but the coffee bean transforms the water.
Ooh, that's good. And people know our community enjoys the coffee over the tea. It's true.
That's right. I'm talking to Seattle. I'm sorry.
You're blending together like
coffee and milk. So people can feel free to paste questions into the chat, and we'll start to ask. Actually, I have one final question, but I think I'll save it for the very end. So in the meantime, dear Ajahn, do you think we should use the phrase metta instead of loving kindness? Metta or maitri simply means friendship. Loving kindness has a different tone to it. Yes, the perennial question of the proper translation of the word metta. Please weigh in, Ajahn.
Yes. So if you listen to my talk, Why I Hate Loving Kindness Meditation, I think that's reason number one. I think the word loving, is too loaded, and it's actually not accurate, because it's like, we're not supposed to, we're not trying to love everybody or our enemies. And, like listening to now, Ajahn Sujato's kind of things, it's really not even, it's really just, it's about it's really about equanimity. Really developing equanimity and he said, it's like that feeling of loving kindness. It's like, we don't even need to try to define it or figure out what it is, because it's like, if you just sit down and just for a second think about what it means to be happy, we know that. Don't doubt ourselves. We already know what that is. If it's a wholesome quality. So I do think that if you understand what the word metta means, in your own heart, then that's fine. I always use in my own mind, it's goodwill. I like that phrase, but I always kind of jump back and forth between loving kindness, because that's what I was taught originally. I'm trying to train myself just to use the phrase goodwill, but it's good to use the word loving kindness just because people know what you're talking about.
Yeah, goodwill. That's Ajahn Nisabho. I think Bhante Sujato now just uses love or advocates just for love.
Ayakema also uses that one.
All right, here, next question. Dear Ajahn, could you share a moment from your saunterings when you felt most equanimous with regards to other park visitors? That would definitely help me in my practice at work as I serve the public.
So this was Ranger Obaso who just asked that question, and he and I last year did a 4 or 5 day trip in Yosemite. So you can see who Ranger Obaso is by going to my channel. But again, what was the question?
Did you feel most times when you felt, or a moment when you felt most equanimous with regards to other park visitors? It's like an event where you navigated an interaction with that sort of equanimous attitude.
Yeah. Well, I spend 99% of my time sauntering is completely alone, and so Birkin is. I think our nearest neighbor is like 5 miles away, and literally we can walk like 4 or 5 miles in any direction and not run into another human being. So I don't really have too many experiences with being equanimous with other people. I guess for me it would be just sort of you do come across where people have dumped garbage or done destruction to the land or something like that, and yeah, it's just again, it's one of those phrases that you develop in your mind. It's just sort of, well, this is the way it is. I could spend all my time getting upset and angry and rightfully being feeling that way. Yeah, people shouldn't do that, but they did, and my getting angry isn't gonna help that. And Ranger Basu has a very big heart, so I think he's teasing me with asking that question. I'm not sure.
Okay, we'll go to our next question. Sometimes I find that when I'm trying to practice metta, the mind has a hard time giving itself over to the practice fully because there's awareness of the ways in which it's based in relative reality, i.e. half of selves and people we like or dislike. Suggestions to help the heart soften into practice and surrender to it more deeply. Thank you for your offerings.
Yeah, and then Bhante Sujato in his talks he does mention some people don't have the temperament for loving kindness practice, and that's totally fine. It's we can be kind people, we can be generous people, but that doesn't necessarily translate into a meditation object. And so what he kind of suggested for the monastic community that he was doing was well, right at the very beginning, is like he mentioned, the Pen Klong practice of equanimity. He said, take a year. Don't be thinking that we need to get into the state of feeling like we're totally equanimous. And like one thing that I do remember that hasn't come up yet in the videos that was in the notes was Ajahn Mahā ChatChai was saying stuff like, when you're developing for various people, this is the way I kind of phrase it. So you're developing this sort of sense of kindness and goodwill in your heart, and you try to get that to where you can feel that way consistently for about 20 minutes in your meditation. And the way he describes it is it Ugiha meditate, Ugita Nimitta?
Oh,
the Kanika Samadhi and the Ugaha Nimitta.
Yeah, Ugaha Nimitta. He described it as sort of like you're in a fog, and all of a sudden you see off in the distance like a light, and the light is coming through, and like that's the safety that you're going towards. It's still not bright, but you're going in the right direction. So it kind of describes this, like when you're in that phrase of in the being able to do loving kindness for about 20 minutes without really getting distracted. It's not that other thoughts don't come in, but it's like, you just see them, it's like you're still having, the way I describe it was like you're holding a bowl of water that's completely filled to the rim. And it's like you're holding that, and you might still be like, I'm talking to you right now, but I'm aware that I'm holding the bowl of water. So I got to be very careful with it. But then if I, you darn this, then it's like you spill it. You get completely off of the thought. And so you need to be able to have the feeling going consistently, even though other things are still happening in your world. And then what happens is once you get it to that point, you switch to the next person, which would be the easy person, the loved person or the good friend.
Kovilo.
Kovilo, right. Now we're going to do Nisabho now. So.
Neutral.
So, but then when you switch to this new person, what happens is you actually learned a lot about how your mind works to be able to get basically to that first level of access concentration. Is that what that first level? Access concentration. And then you learned a lot about yourself. So you learn how you self-sabotage your own meditation, or you start learning where you feel like you're not good enough, or you start realizing how it is you fail at doing it to yourself. Then when you switch to doing let's say a good friend, all of a sudden you'll have a lot more strength when you go into doing them. But what you'll start noticing is you have other expectations or other judgments about other people than you do for yourself. And so you'll start learning what defilements you have around those, and then you're strengthening the mind to see those. And then when you get into a neutral person, the next level there is usually indifference. It's just somebody that you don't really not necessarily care about, but you have no strong feelings of love or hatred. So it's harder to stay with that feeling. And even at that point, you're really strong in your concentration when you get to that point. But it's still, you're learning now about how to deal with indifference. An interesting point there is that's where actually Mahā ChatChai does bring up several during the practice of loving kindness. He does actually bring in sometimes it's good to go back to breath meditation or go back to the equanimity. But here he brings in the practice of bringing up the 4 Iddhipadas. And actually, even before you start doing the neutral person, you should bring these up, which is Chanda, Virya, Chitta, and is it Dhammavichaya?
Vimamsa, which is the synonym for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's you're bringing up energy. You're bringing up starts off
Wholesome desire.
Yeah, wholesome. Yeah, so wholesome desire, energy. You're reflecting about the mind, and then so it's just that's a whole practice in and of itself. So he says, just kind of studying that a little bit, and then practicing that for just 5 minutes, and then going into the other practice. So yeah, there's techniques and ways that you can develop loving kindness, and it's if but I think we mentioned it earlier on too. It's if you sit down and you don't feel like you're really connecting to the emotion of it, it's just the fact that you're not sending ill will. That in and of itself is metta.
I love the idea of pretending you're doing metta meditation if you can't actually do it. That's brilliant. And we are going to have to switch over to Zoom soon. So if people have questions in the chat and haven't had a chance to ask them, we'll get a chance in the Zoom room. Before we do, though, I wanted to end on another question, Ajahn. In the benefits of loving kindness, the 11 benefits, one sleeps easily, wakes easily, dreams no evil dreams, and one is protected from fire, poison, and arrows. And that part always strikes as a bit strange, but you actually have a story of coming to Abhayagiri after the wildfires had hit, or had nearly burned the whole monastery to the ground, or threatened to do so. Would you talk to us about the situation when you returned and kind of the firefighters' testimony about what the fire did when it reached the monastery? What, in terms of that protective.
Yeah.
I think he told us not to ask that because it would take him 10 days to answer.
I think he said we could spend 10 days on it, but this is a good story. So if you can give it to us in 5 to 10 minutes, then maybe 5.
They did send me a few preliminary questions, and I was like, we could talk for a year on all of those questions. And 10 days just on that question there. So I was one of the first people to come back to the monastery. That was what, 2018, 2017?
2017.
2017, yeah, there was a big fire that came through and it killed about 12, 16 of our neighbors. And we were evacuated for a month and were graciously put up at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. Master Wa's community hosted us and took very good care of us. And then when they finally let people back in, 5 or 6 of us went in initially just to go see if it was livable, see what the conditions were like, to see if it was safe for the community. And sure enough, like we got there and they had broken the water line, so we had no water. So we had to, one of the monks came back, who was the water monk, and fixed all that. And then we came back the next day. But first thing I wanted to do is there's a loop trail that goes through the back of the Abhayagiri monastery, about 2.5 mile long trail. And I wanted to run back in the back and see, what had happened back there. Because you could see when you came in that the back half of the monastery was burnt. And so walked out there, and a lot of the firefighters were still out there working. And I remember I was out, well, almost all of them that I asked, I said, how long they'd been there. And they were like, from the beginning. And I said, well, what was it like? And they said, well, it's the weirdest thing. They said that the fire had come down at nighttime, was burning down the ridge, and it came to the loop trail that goes all the way around. And it's kind of high at elevation too, but it came down to this loop trail. And they said it was as if the fire refused to cross the trail. And then they said all of a sudden when it kind of reached there, it reversed itself out of the monastery. It kind of went, which was completely contrary to the weather conditions. Like normally when it gets cool at night, it kind of forces the fire down. But it reached that trail and it stopped, and then it just went back out the monastery. And they said their hair kind of stood on end, and everybody was just sort of like, what's going on? And so that was that story. And then I was talking to one of the Garmins. The Garmin family does all the sort of earth moving and construction work for us. And they were, 2 of the brothers were there with their bulldozers and were working on the property. And I found out later that one or both of them were there on the day. And I asked him, I said, what was it like when you were that day? And he looked at me and he goes, someone in your monastery is practicing really well. That's all I could get from him. So.
Ajahn, I think we'll go over to Zoom, but speaking of practicing really well, so I don't know if you've experienced this, but I mentioned that I had a niece, and every time I would go back to visit her, it would be like once every 6 months or once every year or once every 2 years. And, she's young and she's just growing so fast. And it's interesting. I feel this way with my monastic brothers and sisters, is that I don't see them for a while, and then I see them, a year or 2 later, and it's like, oh, there is fruit and result of good and bad, good action and good practice. And I feel like your metta continues to grow. I've always felt like you've had a lot of metta, but it's really good to see you. And we will put links both to Ajahn Sujato's YouTube series in the show notes, as well as we actually found a whole Ajahn Mahā ChatChai's YouTube channel. And we look at these pictures of him, these videos of him, and we're like, how old is this guy? And like, there's a video from last year for his 69th birthday celebration. So he looks like he's, in his 40s, but he's 70. So it's
the fruits of samadhi. And, just to also say, this story of Abhayagiri can sound very far-fetched for people who haven't been there, but you can still walk there today, and you walk down the loop trail, and it's not a big trail. It's 2 feet wide. And on the right, it's devastation or former devastation. And on the left, it's unburnt. And it's hard to deny something kind of profound there, actually. And so it's a fun ending story. But
Well, the same thing happened at Mount Tabor. Our next door neighbor. It's like the fire came and burnt. Kind of happened like there, our next door neighbor, like this on the ridge, and the fire kind of came down a little bit between our 2 properties. But the abbot there was on the phone with somebody at the monastery. He's like, what's that noise I'm hearing in the background? He goes, oh, that's just the fire alarms. We're like, what? Yeah, it's like raining down embers and stuff like that. And their church is made out of cedar, cedar shakes, roofs and stuff like that. And the abbot's like, "Isn't the place burning down?" It's like, no. Neither one of us lost a single structure. It's totally amazing.
Ecumenical devas.
Yes. Yes.
Multi-faith. Yeah.
Well, Ajahn, we hope we get to have you visit at some point Seattle. And for those who want to visit with Jotipālo and Ajahn Kovilo for a little longer, we'll jump over to Zoom. I've pasted the link in the chat, and if you don't see it there, you can find it on clearmountainmonastery.org about halfway down the page under the Wednesday live stream listing. And yeah, that's it.
Ajahn, thank you so much. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this. It's a pleasure.
All right.